The man never expected that before he transmigrated, he could actually pick and choose the difficulty. And as a pro gamer, he chose Hell difficulty without hesitation. The experience needed to level up is 100 times the normal amount. Because one's class also affects the difficulty, he had originally glanced at a class like Demon King, which looked very strong. But just then, a summoner class, marked with 8 stars for the highest difficulty and equally maxed out potential, popped up. Thinking about how he already preferred build crafting and growth-based gameplay, he went all in and locked in this class. After that, his vision went black, and when he came to his senses, he had already arrived in another world. Although he had his own consciousness, his infant body helplessly only allowed him to cry. By the time he was 1 year old, he had basically figured out his situation. He was born into a rather feudalistic serf family, with no personal freedom besides farming. He wasn't allowed to leave the village for his entire life, a start that was very fitting for Hell difficulty. Fortunately, his parents were good people, both around 20 years old. They were still in their honeymoon phase. As for the perks one should get after reincarnating, it was normal not to have them on Hell difficulty, but so far, he didn't even know what being a summoner entailed. However, just this evening, he suddenly discovered that he could open his ability panel. Until one night, he finally discovered he could open his ability panel. The panel displayed his basic attributes and class information. Endurance. The word summoner was clearly listed. Luck. It's just that all his stats were pitifully low. The only thing he could currently use was the lowest level summoning skill. It's worth mentioning that skills in this world also have level settings. Every time he used it, he would accumulate experience, and the amount of magic consumed was equal to the amount of proficiency added to the skill. After understanding this, he felt much more at ease. At least the path for growth was clear. But just as he was preparing to try his first summon, the commotion was so loud that his mother almost discovered him. He could only force himself to wait until the next day, when no one was home during the lunch break. He finally activated the summon. Unexpectedly, for an H-rank summon, he actually summoned a pair of slightly larger grasshoppers. Their intelligence was worrying, and they didn't understand commands at all. Their magic power was only a little stronger than a baby's. But just as he was feeling disappointed, he discovered that the summoned beasts could actually provide their master with a blessing. As long as they existed, they would continuously increase his stats. Endurance +1, agility +1. This grasshopper provided endurance and agility. Endurance +1, agility +1. So 1 point was added to each, displayed directly as a suffix to his attributes. However, before he could be happy for long, his mother suddenly entered the room and stepped on the grasshopper, killing it. His first summoned beast was killed in action right then and there. Luckily, as long as he had magic, he could summon it again. After that, he tried summoning again. This time, a pair of rats appeared. They were also H rank, and the blessing they provided was for stamina and attack. The grasshopper's special skill was jumping. They all seemed very ordinary, but their advantage was that the effects could be stacked. Currently, his summoning limit was 10 rats plus 2 grasshoppers. His strength was already close to that of an adult. This also made him gradually realize something. The true strength of a summoner lies not in a single summoned beast, but in their quantity and composition. You see, this world didn't just have these low-level creatures. Real magic beasts still existed. It's just that at his current level, he couldn't encounter them yet. Around this time, his father and the other men in the village went out hunting. They brought back the body of a C-rank magic beast. Out of curiosity, he begged his father to take him to see it. Only when he actually saw that giant, ferocious beast did he understand what a magic beast truly was. For the villagers to take down a monster of this level, it required the combined effort of at least 20 people to kill it. This also gave him his first intuitive understanding of the power system in this world. Time passed day by day. Nearly 10 months later, his character level still hadn't increased, but his summoning skill had reached level 2 through constant use. Not only did it unlock the concept of mass summoning, but his summon limit also doubled instantly. And it added the function to synthesize summoned beasts. But unexpectedly, when he actually tried, he was completely blocked by his magic limit, whether he was trying to synthesize or summon a higher tier individual. Kept prompting insufficient magic, and he couldn't raise his character level in a short amount of time. He could only continue to wait patiently until he was 3 years old, as his body grew. His maximum mana finally barely met the requirement, and he immediately started a new synthesis route. He successively summoned a frog and a fire rat, and then again, successively summoned a frog and a fire rat. The frog's special skill is taunting, making it suitable as a tank, while the fire rat is good at digging holes to set traps. A pair of bird-type summons also appeared, whose special skill was mimicking sounds, used for luring people. The protection provided by each low-level summon was also increased, significantly raising his durability stat. It was then that he truly realized that the correct way to play a summoner wasn't just to pursue high-level summons. It was to flexibly use the special skills of different summons in combination, even the initial grasshopper and rat. And gathered in large numbers, they could be effective. The only problem was that these summons still had limited intelligence. To coordinate precisely in a real fight would require a lot of practice. And in another part of his life, there was a girl in the village nicknamed Tigress by everyone, who came to practice swords with him almost every day. Even though under the protection of his stats, his physical condition was already far beyond that of others his age. Yet when facing her, he was still completely powerless. Clearly, her talent for swordsmanship was far beyond that of ordinary people. His parents saw this as well, but they just comforted him, telling him not to worry. You see, when a child turns 5, there's an appraisal ceremony to determine if they have any talents. That was a serf's only chance to change their destiny. The days slowly passed with summoning practice and daily life, until one day, the family received some good news. His mother was about to give birth. Because of their limited resources, they could only ask an experienced neighbor to help with the delivery. All the men were sent outside. After an anxious wait, his younger brother was born safely. His father named him Matthew. At that moment, the protagonist gained a new goal. Not only did he have to clear hell mode, he also had to protect this family. But the man never expected that at the talent appraisal ceremony on his 5th birthday, the 9-star summoner identity he had chosen before reincarnating would be revealed in front of everyone. You have to understand, in this world, as long as you awaken a powerful talent, even a serf can change their destiny in an instant. But the moment he placed his hand on the crystal ball, the light was so dazzling that it made everyone instinctively cover their eyes. Logically, a reaction of this magnitude should indicate a world-class talent, no matter how you look at it. But unexpectedly, the result given by the priest stunned everyone. He had no talent, and his talent class was just a jumble of incomprehensible, garbled code. In contrast, his childhood friend Krina, who grew up with him, had finished before him. The light emitted by the crystal ball was equally brilliant. When the light faded, the result needed no further explanation. A 3-star sword saint. A 3-star sword saint. This 1 in 10,000 class was born into a serf family. For a moment, sounds of envy and shock rose and fell. Krina's future seemed to be already written. As long as she grew up smoothly, becoming a knight or even a noble was just a matter of time. But what no one expected was that she herself was completely unaware of the weight of his talent. She just felt a little disappointed that she couldn't become a normal swordsman, and even pouted, looking unhappy. And after the protagonist's test result was announced, he didn't receive the ridicule or cold stares he had imagined. Apparently, in the villages around here, more than half the people could never awaken a talent in their entire lives. Having no talent wasn't the same as being useless, it just meant you would be like most people, living an honest life of farming. After his parents learned the result, their attitude remained the same as always. They were even proud of the new life they had welcomed. Although the family was poor, it was always warm. For this, the protagonist felt genuinely fortunate. However, only he knew the truth in his heart. The abnormality at the appraisal ceremony wasn't a malfunction. That garbled code was actually an extraordinary class not yet officially registered by the system. An 8-star summoner. As for why it showed up as having no talent, with all stats at only level 1 and looking completely unremarkable, the reason was very simple. Because before he was reincarnated, he had unhesitatingly chosen hell mode. His growth rate was only 1% of a normal person's, and the experience needed to level up was 100 times the norm to start. Describing his potential as only 1 was actually quite fitting. That night, the main character checked his status panel again. The data was exactly the same as the appraisal result from the daytime, but he wasn't discouraged by it. As a master gamer, he naturally enjoyed a challenge. Even in this world, as long as the rules were clear, he could eventually overcome the odds with time and strategy. But not long after that day, a new turmoil arose. Originally, the main character thought Krina would be taken away from the village and set off on a completely different path in life. The knight captain's attitude was not warm. He immediately proposed a practical combat test. And it was the kind with real swords and spears. The reason was also very direct. Only through actual combat could they prove if the appraisal result was true. But unexpectedly, her opponent was the vice captain of the knights. A battle-hardened adult knight. At this, everyone panicked. You have to understand, Krina was only 5 years old. She had never even touched a real sword in her entire life. Usually, she just played with the main character, sparring with wooden swords. Krina's father immediately objected. The father and daughter would be executed on the spot for fraud. The atmosphere instantly dropped to a freezing point. The main character knew in his heart, this was no longer a question of whether she could win, but that she had to. But just as everyone's hearts were pounding, Krina herself showed no signs of nervousness. Instead, she was incredibly excited, fascinated by the real sword in the knight's hand. As long as she could use a real sword, she was willing to take the test, completely unaware that if she performed poorly, death awaited her. The match began quickly. Krina was the first to attack. Her movements were swift, and her speed was astonishing. This alone was enough to surprise the knights present, but the difference in experience quickly became apparent. The vice captain easily deflected her attacks and even seized an opportunity to kick Krina away. She crashed hard against the wall. Seeing this, the main character felt as if his heart was about to stop. He wanted to rush forward but was held back firmly by the surrounding knights. In his current state, he had no strength to resist. But just when everyone thought the match was over, Krina slowly stood up. And in the next second, the aura around her changed drastically. A pressure far beyond that of a normal person instantly spread out. The vice captain was clearly stunned, obviously sensing that something was wrong. Krina subconsciously activated a skill exclusive to sword saints. Her entire presence was like that of a completely different person. What happened next was something no one expected. A child of only 5 was actually overpowering an adult knight in a head-on confrontation. One sword strike after another, her attacks were fierce and sharp, until the final blow landed. The vice captain's sword shattered on impact, and only then was the match forced to end. The entire area fell silent, then erupted in cries of disbelief. Krina not only won, but she was also completely unharmed. She had proven with her actions that she was worthy of the title Sword Saint. Even the vice captain himself could only smile wryly and admit defeat. Just like Krina's cry of, "Mister, thank you for the lesson. Mister, you're so strong." I'm not a mister. Afterward, the knight captain formally apologized to Krina's family. He also explained the reason for his harsh attitude. It turns out that 3 years ago, a certain count's family had announced the birth of a sword saint. Without proper verification, they were sent to serve the royal family, but their performance later fell far short of expectations. After another appraisal, it was discovered their talent was merely that of a one-star swordsman. Similar fraudulent incidents were not isolated cases. Since then, the kingdom has become extremely cautious about appraisal results. That's why this time, it was necessary to confirm it through actual combat. Now that the facts were before him, the captain no longer had any doubts and formally acknowledged Krina's talent. He stated that once she turns 12, she can go to the Academy City for advanced studies, and that her future is very promising. In addition, he would also dispatch instructors to the village to prepare the talented children in advance. And during their conversation, the captain also mentioned the main character's father, Hee Kyu-yoon, calling him a hero of the village. It turned out that the giant boar meat he had previously offered was highly praised by the lord. News of this accomplishment had long since reached the ears of the knights. It was only then that the main character realized that even if he hadn't shown any talent for now, his father's hard work had already paved a different path for their family. Even so, the main character knew very well in his heart that what he could truly rely on in the end was his own strength. It was a foregone conclusion that Krina would be freed from her serf status. But the relationship between the two families didn't change because of it. After all, their parents were childhood friends who knew each other well. This friendship wouldn't disappear just because of their status. This episode wasn't an explosive high point in the traditional sense, but rather revolved around the changes in talent ranking and the rules. There were no contrived scenes of suppression or meaningless ridicule. Instead, it used a gentle approach to lay the groundwork for future growth. The real main storyline also begins to take shape here. Live your life with dignity and your head held high. It might be tough, but you will be fine, because you are my son. Because this is hell mode. The man never would have thought that the reason he was judged to be the strongest star rank summoner wasn't simply because of the large number of summoned beasts. You see, besides the summoned beasts continuously providing him with attribute buffs, more importantly, every time he leveled up, whether it was his character level or skill level, his stats would multiply. But the problem was precisely here, because when he was transported to this world, he had chosen hell difficulty. Not only was the experience required to level up 100 times that of a normal person, but he was also born into a serf family. Even the most basic way of leveling up, like leaving the village to fight monsters, was completely blocked off. Even so, he wasn't completely without options. It's just that reality was right in front of him. Serfs were not allowed to go out without permission. There were only a few opportunities a year to follow the adults on a hunt, and being so young, he didn't even qualify for that. Skills could gain experience just by being used, but after the summoner-related skills reached level 3, the experience required to keep leveling up had soared to the point where it would be calculated in decades. Simply put, it was slower than the rate his mother was having children. And that's why when he realized his mother was pregnant with her third child, he felt a bit conflicted. Despite this, he wasn't without progress. As time went by, his summoner skill finally reached level 3 after 2 whole years. At that moment, his summon limit increased from 20 to 30. At the same time, he unlocked a key ability that could change his growth path, Enhanced Summoned Beast. This skill could permanently increase a summoned beast's own stats, and it wouldn't affect the buff effects they originally provided. Because of this, he immediately began trying to enhance his existing summoned beasts. But during the process, unexpected things happened one after another. For example, that Dianca still maintained its usual hug-kill habit the moment it was summoned, forcing him to get into a defensive stance in advance. Its appearance didn't change significantly, but the pressure it gave off after being enhanced was immediately apparent. Just as he was preparing to continue his research, his mother's voice suddenly came from inside the house. In the next second, Dianca was once again mercilessly stomped into card fragments. As time went by, the main character was finally able to consistently summon S-rank beings, such as the leech, Pochi the pigeon, and that fruit that didn't look like a combat unit at all. Luck plus 5, magic power plus 5. At first, he just thought this thing had no offensive capabilities. But you have to know, the buff this fruit provided was a dual boost to both magic power and luck. He realized that with increased magic power, the number of times he could use his skills would increase, and the efficiency of gaining skill experience would also improve. This indirectly shortened his leveling time by several years. Without hesitation, he immediately summoned it to try the fruit's unique special skill. But unexpectedly, after activating the skill, the fruit plunged headfirst into the ground. At first glance, he was completely baffled. That's it? No way. It wasn't until later that the main character discovered that this fragrance actually had a sleep-inducing effect and could also shorten his magic power recovery time. It went from the original 6 hours for a full recovery to 5 hours. The only drawback was that once the special skill was activated, this fruit would completely lose its summoned beast form and take root and grow like a tree, unable to be recalled into a card. The following days were particularly monotonous. Every morning, he would practice swordsmanship with his childhood friend, Krina. Although his base stats had improved a lot under the buffs of his summoned beasts, in the face of real swordsmanship techniques, he was still completely powerless against this future sword saint. However, it was in this process of constant defeat that his swordsmanship skill unknowingly rose to level 3. He had gained a certain ability to protect himself. Meanwhile, the protagonist would still relentlessly practice throwing every day. After throwing a rock 200,000 times, he managed to grind his throwing skill to level 3. But his throwing skill didn't improve any further, and he also gradually realized That the only abilities he could truly and steadily grow were those directly related to being a summoner. As for why he didn't frequently use summoning skills to grind experience, the reason was simple: he had limited mana. Using it steadily once every 5 hours was actually the most efficient. He thought this life, though slow, was at least stable, but on this day, terrible news arrived without any warning. His father went out hunting and didn't return. It wasn't until night that he was carried back to the village, covered in blood. It turned out that while hunting a wild boar, he was sent flying by a direct hit from its tusks. If it weren't for Cleana's father bringing precious medicinal herbs in time, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Upon asking, he learned that the root of this accident wasn't his father, but the commoners who had newly joined the hunt. Since most of the wild boar meat had to be handed over to the lord, what was left was extremely precious to ordinary people. Those commoners who didn't usually participate in hunts shamelessly requested to join after a hero emerged from among the serfs. Although the serfs disapproved, the village chief's order couldn't be defied. And at the moment they truly faced the magical beast. They were so scared they dropped their weapons and fled in all directions. This was what attracted the wild boar's attention. That's why his father was severely injured while saving someone. After all this, the protagonist truly realized for the first time that he had been viewing this world from a gamer's perspective. He pursued efficiency and leveling up, ignoring that the people around him weren't NPCs, but family members struggling to survive in this cruel world. Because of this, he resolved to no longer hide his strength, but to truly integrate into this world and protect this family. From that day on, he took the initiative to do all the physical labor, under the shocked gazes of the others. His small body easily lifted buckets of water. To increase efficiency, he even temporarily cancelled the mana blessing from his golems, transferring all his attributes to stamina and strength, just to prepare enough supplies before winter arrived. But even so, reality gave him no room to breathe. To supplement the food reserves for winter, he decided to risk catching wild animals. He used a frog with a taunt skill to set a trap. He had only intended to catch some ordinary creatures, but he never expected to attract a pair of earth-ranked demonic beasts, albas. Seeing his frogs get killed one after another, the protagonist intended to retreat immediately. But in the next second, he suddenly realized that in a real fight, once a summoned beast is killed, the blessing effect also disappears. This meant his true strength was rapidly declining. However, looking at it another way, with all his summoned beasts still alive, the attribute blessings he received were no less than those of someone fighting above their level. With his throwing skill at level 3, he first used rocks to restrain its movements. Then, he swung his wooden sword and charged head-on, while the pochis launched a biting attack. Their coordination should have been flawless, but reality was far crueler than expected. It quickly countered, a pochi was killed instantly, and the protagonist was also sent flying by a swipe of its claw. For the first time, he truly felt the pressure of being on the brink of life and death. The summoner class is truly terrifying. Oh no, I am going to die like this. And so, the third stage of Hell Mode officially comes to an end. How he'll counterattack against this strong foe will be revealed in the next episode. Finally, a quick analysis of some details. The reason the protagonist, despite having a star rank class, seems to grow at a similar rate to a 3-star sword saint in the early stages is that the value of the summoned beast blessings is far higher than the boost from regular leveling. Even though he loses the blessing when a summoned beast dies, with the support of numbers and enhancement skills, he still has potential far beyond others of the same level. This kind of slow burn but logically self-consistent system of progression. 1.5. The man never would have thought that after choosing Hell Mode, the first thing to come in handy wouldn't be those majestic-looking summoned beasts, but the most inconspicuous leech. Turns out that summoners don't even exist in this world, and his 8-star growth class becomes more terrifying the later the stage. But the problem is, right now he's only level 1, practically at the very bottom of the food chain. But on this day, in the safe zone, he encountered a pair of D-rank monsters called albas. Logically, even a group of adults working together would pay a heavy price to defeat them. Let alone a 6-year-old child like him. Fighting them head-on from the start would clearly be suicide. He knew very well that no matter what offensive type beast he summoned, it would be instantly wiped out. But at the critical moment, he had a flash of insight and instead summoned what appeared to be his most useless pet, a leech. It had low offensive power and a small body, so he originally just planned to use it as a distraction and then run for it. But unexpectedly, when the fight began, he discovered that these leeches weren't sucking blood at all. Instead, they were draining the opponent's stats. Of course, the leeches still died with a single touch. Seeing this, he realized he had a chance and immediately changed his strategy. He continuously summoned leeches to weaken the opponent while mixing in other summons to act as distractions. He repeated this tactic for who knows how many rounds, until finally, with a strike of his sword, the D-rank monster collapsed to the ground. Logically, the 100 experience points gained from defeating a D-rank monster should be enough for a normal person to level up several times. But he had chosen Hell difficulty, where the experience required to level up is 100 times that of a normal person. After all that, his experience bar only filled up by 1/10, and his level remained stuck at 1. But even so, he was very satisfied, because the experience bar that had been dormant for 6 years was finally moving. He dragged the creature's body home, a sight that left his family completely stunned. A 6-year-old child, who was deemed to have no talent, had actually killed a D-rank monster all by himself. It seemed completely unrealistic. To avoid causing trouble, he gave a half-true explanation. He said it was already injured, and the bite marks all over its body were proof. And what about these bite marks here? You bit it, didn't you? I bit it, oops. I was too focused on the fight, so I'm not really sure. The explanation sounded plausible, so everyone just had to assume he got lucky and managed to survive. Soon, the work of bleeding and butchering began, and Gerda explained things to him. An adult alba weighs about 60 kilograms, and after it's bled, you can get about 20 kilograms of jerky from it. The rest, like the feathers and the magic stone, are also valuable. The problem is, his family are serfs. According to the rules, they must hand over 60% of anything they hunt. They aren't even allowed to keep magic stones from monsters that are D rank or higher. It all has to be handed over to the village, and the village chief then gives it to the lord. This meant that after risking his life, there was pitifully little left for him. But this time, they saw an opportunity. His father had previously been severely injured while protecting the other commoners. This earned him a great deal of respect among the serfs. So, he and Gerda framed the story as his father being injured in the line of duty. They claimed the family wouldn't survive the winter, which forced the child to risk his life hunting. The two of them went to the village chief's house, put on a miserable act, and offered to hand over all the feathers and the magic stone, begging only to keep the meat. At first, the village chief refused to budge, since the lord had just ordered an increase in the amount of meat to be handed over. But faced with Gerda's shameless persistence, and with the boy playing his part, the village chief started to give in. In the end, he chose to bend the rules. He only asked for the materials and the magic stone, allowing them to deal with the meat themselves. But just then, our hero casually asked, so from now on, we just have to hand over the feathers and magic stone? And we can keep the meat? Gerda immediately chimed in, besides, albas are really hard to catch. The village chief didn't have time to think and casually agreed. Only after the two of them left did he realize something was off, but he had already given his word and it was too late to take it back. Just like that, his era of monster grinding officially began. As he hunted more and more, his tactics became more refined. The frog was in charge of jumping out to draw attention. The leeches were in charge of weakening their stats, and Pochi was responsible for holding the target down. All he had to do was deliver the final blow. Eventually, even when facing two monsters at once, he could easily suppress them with his army of summons, without needing to lift a finger himself. Most importantly, his summoned beasts couldn't truly die. As long as he recalled and resummoned them, he could use them indefinitely. Stamina +5, attack power +5. By recalling and resummoning, it can be used infinitely, which is equivalent to having zero cost. Until one day, after continuously killing the 10th one, his experience points finally maxed out. After 6 years, the protagonist successfully reached level 2. The moment he leveled up, his stamina and mana were fully restored. All of his base stats instantly doubled. And you have to remember, this is hell mode. Although the difficulty of leveling up is 100 times greater, once he breaks through, the growth he obtains also far surpasses that of an ordinary person. The physical changes after leveling up were impossible to hide from his family. So, the protagonist decided to come clean and reveal the secret of his reincarnation. He explained that he received a divine oracle from the creator god in his childhood, and that the god had bestowed wisdom and power upon him. This was the reason the appraisal ceremony showed he had no talent. This explanation successfully convinced his parents. His father, especially, became convinced that our hero's talent was truly extraordinary. After all, even Karina, who had awakened the Sword Saint talent, couldn't defeat an Emperor-class monster on her own. The protagonist also started to think about his future. His status as a serf was too limiting for his growth. Not only did he have to give up 60% of his income, but he also had no freedom of movement. Through an introduction from Gerda, he learned that he just had to pay the Lord 10 gold coins to be free from serfdom and become a commoner. But counting his parents, himself, and his unborn child, the whole family would need a total of 50 gold coins. To put that in perspective, the meat from one kill was worth about 10 silver coins. That's only 0.1 gold coins, which meant he would have to kill 500 creatures to get enough money. This forced the protagonist to be extremely frugal. He couldn't even bring himself to buy a new weapon. After all, he could manage just fine by relying purely on his summoned beast. But during this period, he also ran into a problem. A boy named Dracula, who had awakened the subservience talent, came to challenge him, insisting that our hero become his subordinate. At first, the protagonist had no interest in this kind of PvP, but the other guy was so persistent that he decided to put an end to it once and for all. He beat the boy into complete submission. The result? He somehow ended up with a new underling. And so, Dracula started showing up every few days to challenge him to a duel, and each time he was beaten so badly he couldn't fight back. Meanwhile, there was good news at home. His mother safely gave birth to a baby girl named Mira. But the good times didn't last. His father and Gerda soon returned with terrible news. The quota of wild boars they had to deliver this year had increased from 10 to 15. And the following year, it would rise to 20. Officially, commoners would be allowed to join the hunt. But in reality, inexperienced people would only be a hindrance. What's worse, if they failed to meet the quota, the Lord would even forcibly conscript serfs from the territory. For anyone else, this was a crisis. But in our hero's eyes, it was actually an opportunity. AC rank wild boar gave a whopping 400 experience points. That was 4 times the usual. Using the creator god's oracle as his justification, he went straight to his father and asked for command of the hunt. He planned to participate in the hunt himself, both to ensure everyone's safety and to do some leveling on the side. After all, he knew that simply hunting more often wouldn't solve the root problem. The only way to truly survive was to increase their overall strength. And this is where Hell Mode truly begins. Animation. That's all for the latest on Hell Mode Warriors, a self-produced video. Next, let's supplement this with some detailed analysis. Sound production, Ryusho Katayama Mizuki. Although the protagonist is the world's strongest 8-star summoner, sound production, Ryusho Katayama Mizuki, but he is different from your typical overpowered protagonist, even though he can infinitely boost the stats of his summoned beasts. Our hero didn't choose the path of becoming a god himself. Instead, drawing on his experience as a pro gamer in his past life, he coordinates the unique characteristics and skills of each summoned beast to fight opponents far above his level. This setup perfectly compensates for his choice of Hell mode, laying the foundation for his future progress. Plus, every detail of his leveling process is vividly described, which satisfies the audience's curiosity about the logic behind his growth. It enhances the story's believability and satisfaction, rather than just presenting a character who is absurdly overpowered from the very beginning. The overall storyline's pacing is both slow and fast. I mean, who has ever seen a character have 3 children within 4 episodes? The protagonist's mother is pretty formidable. Also, according to the setup in the first episode, the most powerful hero and demon king in this world are only 5-star. But our hero's summoner class is 8-star. Therefore, these first 4 episodes basically serve as the tutorial in the starter village. The true hellish difficulty will gradually emerge later. The challenge of leveling up is just the beginning. In the manga, even the monsters have health bars that are basically 100 times bigger. And later, he'll even have to confront the Demon King's army. The protagonist, who was enjoying himself at first, will soon be taking his summoned beasts to fight all over the world. He'll quickly learn what it really means to slave away in this new reality. In his past life, our hero was a raid commander. He was used to standing in the back, overseeing the whole battle while watching others fight to the death. He'd just sit back and reap the rewards. His own attack power was just 1. But after being reincarnated into another world, it was then he realized there was no party experience sharing system here. If you don't actually participate in the fight, you won't get a single point of experience. To make matters worse, he had started out by choosing the Hell difficulty, 1-star summoner. His experience gain rate was slashed down to just 10%. By all accounts, this was a surefire Hell mode start. What's more, his status in this life was merely a serf, so he wasn't allowed to leave the village as he pleased. That made actively hunting monsters to level up out of the question. His path to growth was essentially blocked from the very start. But the summoner class isn't one that relies on brute force anyway. Its true strength doesn't lie in how much damage a summoned beast can deal, but in the stat bonuses that each summon grants back to its master, and the potential to form a complete, versatile system in the future. Once it's fully developed, a single person can cover DPS, defense, healing, crowd control, and scouting, making them equivalent to an entire army. Only one question remained: if he couldn't participate in fights, how was he supposed to gain experience? It wasn't until he was 7 that he finally managed to convince his father to let him go along with the villagers on a hunt. However, the target of this hunt was a C-rank monster, a wild boar. Given his status and age, he could only watch from a distance. He couldn't actually participate. The hunting party's overall strength ranged between C rank and D rank. They didn't have any flashy abilities, relying entirely on skills they had honed through daily practice. Because of this, they developed an extremely stable, no-damage hunting method. On the surface, it seemed this trip was just for him to broaden his horizons. But killing a C-rank boar isn't easy. 1 is manageable, but if the numbers increase, casualties are almost unavoidable. What made things worse was that the Lord demanded the village increase its kill count every year. If they just relied on brute force, they would have run into disaster long ago. For this very reason, our hero began to use his gaming knowledge from his past life to completely re-engineer their hunting process. The fastest ones were responsible for luring the monster, while the tanky frontliners got into position ahead of time. As the wild boar charged forward with its momentum, they would use a long spear to pierce its nostrils, thereby controlling it. Then, the main attackers would surround it for the kill, and just before the boar went down, they would have the newly joined commoners step forward to deal the final blow. This way, even serfs with no special abilities or combat experience could gain experience in a relatively safe manner. The more people they had, the more stable the hunt became. In the future, they could easily handle even larger numbers of boars. Looking at the results, this strategy practically achieved a perfect, no-damage hunt. But just as our hero thought he could also gain experience by simply being in charge of directing the fight, the system gave him a cruel answer. After the hunt, the commoners all leveled up, but his experience bar was still empty. It was at that moment that he finally understood. In this world, giving commands doesn't count as participation, even if you've devised the perfect strategy. If you aren't judged by the system as having entered combat, you can forget about getting even a single point of experience. For anyone else, this would have been a dead end, but he was a hardcore gamer through and through. The very instant the next wild boar appeared, he had already secretly sent out his summoned beast. It didn't need to attack or deal any damage, it just had to enter the area that triggers combat. Even if it got trampled to death the very next second, as long as the system registered that it had participated in the battle, the experience would be tallied, and the result was exactly as he had predicted. The summoned beast was instantly killed, leaving nothing behind. It happened so fast that no one noticed the small incident, and the moment the wild boar fell, his level shot straight up to level 3. This completely opened up a new path for him. After all, the experience from a C-rank boar was a full 4 times that of a D-rank monster. Even with the hell difficulty experience penalty, it was still an incredibly valuable resource. As long as he could consistently leech and assist, leveling up wouldn't be a problem at all. And just like that, 3 months went by in a flash. Our hero, relying entirely on this mechanic to farm experience, made his way all the way to level 6. The summoner's stat bonuses started to become apparent. His strength had already clearly surpassed that of most adults. But if he wanted to actually participate in the hunt himself, he absolutely needed his father's permission. So he came up with a plan, using the credit he'd earned from directing the hunts. He got a bottle of fine wine from the village chief. For warriors like his father and Gerda, wine was something they had almost no resistance to. The two of them got completely drunk and finally agreed to a duel. If he could win at arm wrestling, he would be allowed to participate in a real hunt. To prepare for this, he not only raised his level to 6, but he also swapped all his card slots for strength boosting cards. When facing Gerda, he won the match with almost no effort. Gerda himself was a D-rank warrior and was considered one of the strongest in the village. But in arm wrestling, he was completely no match for him. However, when it was his father's turn to grip his calloused hand, he could still clearly feel the gap between them. His father was a battle-hardened warrior forged purely through hunting. He had killed countless wild boars in his lifetime. Even as a common serf, he was among the top tier of C-rank individuals. His level and combat experience were far above his own, so even though the protagonist had clearly narrowed the gap, he still lost completely in the end. Because of this, his father set a condition for him. Only when he could defeat his father would he be allowed to truly join the hunt. But right after that, a new problem emerged. Wild boars and deer were autumn monsters. After summer began, this meant he would lose his main source of experience for a full 9 months. By June, his level was still stuck at 6, but his skills saw a key breakthrough. Both his summoning and enhancement skills reached level 4. Not only did this unlock level 1 summoned beasts, it also unlocked a seemingly unreasonable skill, storage. This storage space appeared to be infinite. There was no capacity indicator nor any quantity limit. From a player's perspective, this was clearly against normal game design. Giving a player an infinite inventory during the novice stage didn't seem like a benefit at all. It wasn't until the system gave the next requirement that it all finally made sense. Starting with level 1 summoned beasts. Generation and synthesis both required magic stones, and they had to be placed in the storage space first to take effect. In other words, this storage wasn't a benefit, but a necessary system module to support the massive quantities needed later. Fortunately, magic stones in this world weren't scarce. Only D-rank and higher magic stones had any value. As for level 1 magic stones, they were practically no different from regular stones, so no one cared about them. Through his daily collection, the protagonist quickly gathered enough materials. Then, the first batch of level 1 summoned beasts officially appeared. Once the spirit cat appeared, even C-rank beasts could hardly resist it. The dark-type saber-toothed tiger was pure brute force damage. Its bites and claw attacks were finally no longer just scratching the surface. The bird-type summon provided reconnaissance and early warnings. Enemies were locked onto before they even got close. The grass-type was responsible for healing. Injuries could be healed to full health in an instant, while the stone-type was the core of the team's defense. It could take a wild boar's charge head-on and even kill it with a counter-shock. It seemed like he was still alone, but he had already covered all the roles needed in a party. Only then did the true horror of the summoner class fully reveal itself. That's why the storage function was unlocked at this specific time, allowing him to carry hundreds of magic stones around. This was the game developer's intention. No matter what situation he faced, he would have an unstoppable, peerless army. This is the power that allows a summoner to surpass even the Demon King. Even though he was just a summoner, his performance in close combat was in no way inferior to the future Sword Saint. You have to understand, every summoned beast provides him with a stat boost. And the higher their level, the more significant the boost. It's because of this that he alone was a match for an entire squad. As long as he was given enough time to develop, surpassing even the Demon King was not just empty talk. But the problem was precisely this. He was born a serf and didn't have the freedom to go out as he pleased. Although he could level up using deer and wild boars, they were seasonal monsters with extremely low spawn rates. They couldn't support his growth curve at all. If he wanted to truly grind monsters without restriction, there was only one way. That was to leave his serfdom and become a commoner. There were 2 paths to becoming a commoner. One was to hand over 10 gold coins. But at his current rate of income, it would probably take him many years to save up. The second was to get a single word of approval from the Lord. He originally thought the latter was unrealistic, but on this very day, the village chief brought some news. Next month, the Lord, Baron Grant, was coming to the village to inspect the wild boar hunt. Hearing this, he remained outwardly calm. He quickly calculated in his mind. The Baron was coming to the countryside in person. This showed he took the matter very seriously, and their village was the one that killed the most wild boars in the territory. After asking around, he learned that increasing the hunting quota wasn't the Baron's idea, but an order from the king under the influence of Viscount Karl. The Baron couldn't refuse and could only increase the quota year after year. This meant that as long as he performed well enough, he would have a chance to be noticed. That's why when the village chief appointed him to be in charge of the reception, he didn't refuse. He had no love for the nobility, but this might be his only chance to escape his status as a serf. In the blink of an eye, the day of the inspection arrived. Escorted by a company of knights, Baron Gran arrived in the village with his daughter, Soccer. At the welcome banquet, the protagonist specially prepared meticulously cooked venison. The Baron, despite being a noble, lived a simple life. Normally, he didn't even get a share of the boar meat they submitted. To now have such a delicious meal in a poor village naturally made his impression of the protagonist improve greatly. Village chief, what kind of meat is this? This is all the meat. We're presenting the one we just caught yesterday. To you, my lord. We used the breast meat, leg meat, and liver. And added herbs to enhance the flavor. And this was the protagonist's first step. After all, if he was just a serf child talking, he could easily be ignored. But when the other person already has a good impression of you, your words carry more weight. Next up was the main event, the hunting demonstration. The protagonist had built a watchtower in advance so the Baron and his party could watch the whole thing. The hunting team had undergone a massive upgrade. The front line wore armor made from boar hide, and carried large shields crafted from the hide of a boar's back. Their tactics had also gone through many iterations. First, the bait squad lures out the boar. Then, the shield group moves forward to block its charge and pin it down. Next, the spearmen attack from the side. Once the boar is dead, new members deliver the final blow to gain experience. The whole process was swift and efficient, with almost zero casualties. The Baron had originally planned to have his knights provide support if necessary. But seeing this scene, he couldn't help but be impressed. You have to understand, in this world, a wild boar is a C-rank magical beast. Even if his knights were to intervene, it might not be this easy. And now, a group of serfs who once couldn't even afford to replace their weapons were able to hunt them consistently, and could even handle two at once with ease. And just when everyone thought it was over, two more wild boars entered the area. Zenov, the captain of the knights, prepared to send men to help. But the protagonist stopped him directly. He quickly split the team into two groups. Repeating the same process, they quickly took care of the two boars. The reason they could do this was, on one hand, their upgraded equipment, and on the other, their optimized tactics. Previously, with taxes as high as 60%, the serfs could barely make ends meet. They had no ability to replace their equipment. Now, through a snowballing accumulation of resources, they achieved today's results. But in reality, the significance of this process went far beyond completing their quota. It was simple, easy to implement, and could be executed just by serfs. It wasn't just applicable to this land, it could even be promoted nationwide. The protagonist took the opportunity to make two requests. First, he hoped the boar hides and bones could be left for the village to make more shields in preparation for next year. The Baron agreed on the spot. Second, he hoped to allow serfs to buy and sell wine to offset the risk of falling meat prices in the future. The Baron said he would consider it carefully. Afterward, back at the village chief's house, the Baron formally announced that the protagonist's family, Gerda's family, and Krina's family were granted the status of commoners. He also promised that any serf who participated in the hunt for 10 full years would receive the same treatment. At that moment, he could hardly believe it had come so easily. But just as he was fantasizing about a future of freely grinding monsters, the Baron's tone suddenly changed. He said he wanted to speak alone with the leader of the hunting team, Rodin, who was the protagonist's father. He made a request. His father thought for a moment and then spoke. He hoped the protagonist could come work at the Baron's manor, even if it was just as a handyman. This one sentence instantly made the protagonist's heart sink. To his father, this was a tremendous honor. But to him, it meant losing his freedom, with even less mobility than a serf. His mind raced, frantically thinking of a countermeasure, but then he saw his father's eyes welling up with tears of joy. But he couldn't bring himself to refuse on the spot. Even worse, the Baron agreed right then and there. He even directly granted him the position of a valet. When Cecil arrived, she had a complicated look on her face. His father was so moved he nearly cried, so our hero could only swallow his objections. He quietly calculated in his mind, figuring at worst, he'd just treat the Baron's manor as a new instance. Before his departure, the villagers came one after another to see him off. Dracula gave him a short sword as a gift. Klina came as well. To break the heavy atmosphere of their farewell, our hero suggested one last sparring match. But this time, he didn't hold back his true strength. He swapped all his enhancement slots to an agility-focused setup, overwhelming her with high-speed attacks from the start. Klina had the talent of a 3-star sword saint, but against his fully enhanced stats, she gradually started to lose ground. Soon, he had a firm advantage. However, it's worth mentioning that while it seemed he was about to win, Klina hadn't used her true ultimate skill. She had previously demonstrated a powerful burst move when she fought the vice captain of the Knight's Order. If she'd used it, the outcome would still be uncertain. They would have to settle the score in the future. As for our hero's abilities, there was a common misconception. It wasn't that the more summons he had, the more the buffs stacked infinitely. He could currently only receive buffs from a maximum of 40 summoned beasts at once. And during his fight with Klina, he hadn't enhanced his attack or durability. Instead, he allocated the buffs to other stats. This also meant his fighting style could be adjusted at any time. From balanced enhancements to single-point bursts, giving him incredible flexibility. And so, under the watchful eyes of his family and the villagers, he boarded the carriage to the Baron's manor. After an 8-year life as a serf, he had finally become a commoner and stepped out into a much wider world. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but that's precisely what motivated him even more. It had been 8 years since he was reborn in this world, and our hero was finally beginning to understand the terrifying power of the summoner class. While others had to form parties to carefully surround and attack goblins, he could do the reverse and swarm the goblins himself. As long as there was enough space, he could summon dozens, or even hundreds, of magical beasts in a single breath. But in reality, to outsiders, he was just an unremarkable valet in the Baron's manor. This story has to begin with his status. Originally the son of a serf, his father managed to secure him an opportunity to serve in the Baron's manor. And not just as an ordinary servant, but as a personal attendant, who was treated like a member of the family. It was because of this that he was able to stay by the Lord's daughter, Cecil, as her personal valet. Although the young lady was usually bossy with him, and her attitude was far from gentle, it unexpectedly granted him two crucial privileges. First, besides the Baron and his wife, only Cecil could give him direct orders. Second, he had one free day each week. As long as it didn't interfere with his duties, he could leave the manor and even the city. And this was his chance to turn his life around. But on his very first day off, He walked into the Adventurers Guild full of anticipation, only to learn that you had to be 12 years old to register. But he was only 8. If he really waited 4 years according to the rules, it would be like crippling himself. So he didn't lose heart. Instead, he approached adventurers near the quest board to gather intelligence. A helpful swordsman told him that monsters below B rank were widespread. Their level increased the farther you went from town, and the truly massive monsters were all found in the White Dragon Mountain range. For example, a C rank monster worth 3 silver coins, and a B rank butcher named Grush, worth 200 gold coins. Not to mention the A rank White Dragon with a 1000 gold coin bounty that no one dared to challenge. By this point, he already had a plan. On his second day off, he used the Baron's Pass to leave town before dawn. Considering the travel time and difficulty, he targeted D-rank monsters within a 10-kilometer radius. He narrowed it down further to goblins within a 3-kilometer radius to cut down on travel time. Next, he tested his summoning abilities. First, he tested their intelligence. He ordered a bird-type summon, a harpy eagle, to move forward 2 steps. The creature followed his command, proving it could understand simple instructions. Harpy eagles had the highest intelligence, making them perfect for scouting, so he summoned 5 or 6 at once and sent them out to search. The main attackers, the saber-toothed tiger and the jade tiger, have low intelligence but excel in attack power. Even though he can only summon level 1 beasts for now, with skill enhancements and attribute bonuses. Their combat power is on par with Earth-rank monsters. Soon, 5 goblins appeared in his sight. Seeing he was discovered, he instantly summoned 10 jade tigers to surround them from the front and back. The goblins had no way to escape. The jade tiger's damage output was impressive, but they couldn't kill them in one hit. And if he himself got hit, he could be killed instantly. So, he summoned a large butterfly to release sleep powder. There was an 80% chance it would put an Earth-rank monster to sleep. It proved to be extremely effective. Even when he deliberately threw a stone to test them, they didn't react at all. In the end, they were easily dealt with by the jade tigers. From this single battle, he gained 1000 experience points. While less than a C-rank monsters, the efficiency was much better. He repeated the same method, and after a whole day, the goblins within a 3-kilometer radius were almost all cleared out by him. Plus, after dealing with some level 1 crafty rabbits along the way, his level shot straight up to 9. He even leveled up multiple times in one day. You see, his body's requirements are 100 times that of a normal person. But even so, his efficiency was still impressive. However, it wasn't until nightfall that he discovered a problem. The Hat Hawk, it turns out, has night blindness. Its scouting ability at night was practically zero. Losing his vision advantage in the wild was extremely dangerous. Frustrated, he had no choice but to return to the city early. For the next month, he completely adopted a gamer's mindset. Every rest day, he would go out to hunt, using his earnings to upgrade his equipment. He even had custom iron balls made to enhance his stone-throwing skill. After 4 hunts, his level steadily rose to 12. During this time, he also discovered that high-level magic stones couldn't be used to summon low-level cards. So, he had to farm level 1 monsters from time to time to restock his magic stones. But eventually, a secret like that can't be kept forever. The Baron noticed he was leaving early and returning late every rest day and asked him about it directly. After weighing the pros and cons, he told a half-truth, admitting that he went out hunting. He didn't mention being a summoner at all. Because I am the son of Rodin, the wild boar hunter. Hunting is also my reason for living. I see. Strange, the words just came out naturally. The Baron misunderstood, thinking he was only killing level 1 crafty rabbits, and was actually very understanding. He even offered to buy them for 1 silver coin, a price higher than the market rate. This way, not only could he leave the city openly, he also gained a steady source of income. But during one of his routine hunts, something unexpected happened. The Hat Hawk suddenly gave a frantic warning, leading him beyond the 3-kilometer radius. The original command was to find goblins, but it flew straight towards a more distant location. Soon, he saw a familiar party of adventurers being surrounded by 4 goblins. The kind-hearted swordsman had fallen, severely injured. The priest was also out of mana. He couldn't reveal his summoned beasts in front of other people. He had no choice but to join the fight himself, relying on the attack and speed boosts of over 300 from his level 12 protection. He quickly provided support by throwing his iron balls. It was a bit slow, but he still steadily overwhelmed the Earth-rank goblins. After the battle was over, the real problem was the swordsman's injuries. The priest was powerless to help, and they were far from town. If left untreated, he would surely die. So, he pretended to take out some herbs. In reality, he used the grass of life generated by his grass-type summoned beast. After a green light flashed, the wound healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. The swordsman quickly regained consciousness. Everyone was shocked by the effect of this miracle medicine. He insisted on repaying the favor, but the protagonist didn't want to be tied down by a debt of gratitude. He only made a couple of requests. First, they must not reveal what happened today. Second, from now on, they should collect the level 1 magic stones they would normally discard and give them to him. For them, it was just junk. For him, it was a vital resource. After the matter was settled, he immediately summoned the Hat Hawk to ask why it had disobeyed his command. It turned out that after discovering another party of dead adventurers in the area, it proactively chose to lead him to the rescue. Apparently, as its intelligence increased, it had developed self-awareness. Commands are no longer the only priority. Moral judgment can actually override them. What does this mean? On one hand, summoned beasts can assist their master more flexibly. On the other hand, if higher-level monsters are summoned in the future, will they develop an even stronger sense of autonomy? And even influence their master? Furthermore, he also realized that killing in a party allows him to get 80% of the experience. This paves the way for new possibilities in the future. The day his identity as a summoner is exposed will eventually come. If he can make good use of the party system, his growth speed might increase once again. In short, from a morning servant to a personal attendant, he finally has some limited freedom. From secretly grinding monsters to openly hunting them, his level steadily increases. And behind all this, a bigger plot point is quietly being laid. The Lord's son is about to return from his training. A true master is about to appear. Meanwhile, that being on Dragon Mountain, which no one dares to challenge, still occupies the summit. The man never would have thought. Mana plus 100, strength plus 100, stamina plus 1, agility plus 1. He had clearly awakened as an 8-star summoner. In terms of class rating, he stood at the very peak, yet in a real fight, he couldn't even defeat a 1-star swordsman. The problem wasn't the strength of his class, but that he had chosen hell difficulty when he started. While others get 100% of the experience from killing monsters, he only gets 1%. Which means with the same amount of effort, his growth speed is naturally 100 times slower. And because of this, before he can catch up in level, his so-called strongest class is nothing but an empty promise. And right now, he's just the personal attendant to the Lord's daughter, Cecil. His status on the surface is low, but in secret, he's desperately leveling up. Every holiday, he goes out to hunt alone, starting by grinding the lowest level goblins. As his level increased, he quickly discovered a cruel fact: the experience from monsters below level 1 was constantly decreasing. Even so, he was still addicted to the feeling of his stats panel increasing every day, his level climbing bit by bit. That certain feeling of steadily growing stronger was intoxicating. On this very day, the Lord's eldest son, Mikhail, returned to the domain after training in the Academy City. At 14, his class was only a 1-star swordsman, but his aura was completely different. Our protagonist was originally just going to help with the luggage, and he easily lifted a box that weighed at least 100 pounds. Little did he know, this scene was witnessed by Mikhail. For a mere attendant to do something like this was certainly not simple. After returning to the mansion, to test the results of his year of training, the Lord invited the captain of the knights to spar with Mikhail. Our protagonist was just observing at first. Seeing the captain draw his sword, he even felt a little excited. But unexpectedly, Mikhail suddenly proposed a match with him. Both the Lord and the captain wanted to see our protagonist's limits. So they tacitly approved the match. At this time, our protagonist was level 20. Attack power, 130. He was confident that he could handle even a 1-star swordsman with ease, and even thought about holding back so as not to hurt the young master. But after they actually clashed, he realized he had been overthinking it. Mikhail was stronger and faster. His swordsmanship was completely superior. Our protagonist's build in his enhancement slots was configured for hunting. It wasn't suitable for sparring to begin with, and on top of that, being unable to use his summoned beasts meant his power was greatly reduced. As the fight progressed, he had to go all out, but he was still steadily overpowered by his opponent and was ultimately defeated. Only afterward did he understand where the gap lay. Mikhail had been grinding dungeons daily in the Academy City. If he didn't clear them during summer break, he would even be expelled. Plus, he had received personal guidance from a sword saint. His actual experience far surpassed that of an ordinary person. And more importantly, his opponent wasn't in hell mode. His experience efficiency was 100 times greater. The level gap was simply impossible to overcome. At that moment, our protagonist truly realized that no matter how strong his class was, if his growth speed couldn't keep up, he would be left behind by others. However, this sparring match also brought an opportunity. The Lord, recognizing his strength, officially appointed him as his personal knight. On the surface, his salary doubled, he'd get an extra 10 silver coins a month, and he could even specialize in hunting monsters. It sounded glamorous, but upon closer inspection, it wasn't a good deal. 1 kilogram of meat was worth 1 silver coin. A single monster he hunted could weigh several hundred kilograms, yet the Lord was only giving him an extra 50 silver coins a month. Clearly, he was trying to cut costs. But our protagonist had another thought. A fixed weekly hunt meant a stable source of experience. For someone in hell mode, that was the most important thing. So on the surface, he sold 1 magical beast to the manor for food each week, but in reality, he would slaughter dozens out in the wild. At first, he targeted goblins, nearly clearing out the entire surrounding area. As his level rose to 24, his equipment was also gradually upgraded with 4 synthesized items, 2 sheets, and 14 throwing weapons. He began to shift his target to C-rank monsters. It was his first real challenge. It was that giant white deer that treated goblins like snacks. A direct confrontation was obviously not smart. So he used the jumping frog's taunt skill to lure the giant deer, step by step, into a trap that his rats had dug in advance. Then he summoned a pack of saber-toothed tigers to gang up on it. When the giant deer fell, the whole manor erupted in cheers. The young master was excited for an extra dish, while the Lord was shocked that he could solo kill a C rank at just level 8. But the protagonist, staring at his experience points, just felt it wasn't very efficient. 2,500 points was nowhere near as worthwhile as farming a group of goblins. Next, he tried taking on the pig men, first fighting a pair to test the waters. Once he confirmed he could crush them, he started clearing them out in batches. After that, he launched a sneak attack on some orcs while they were sound asleep. He successfully killed them and retrieved a C-rank magic stone, which was a decent reward. However, the real challenge was a lone Kai, whose physical resistance was absurdly high. The saber-toothed tiger's sharp claws couldn't even break its defense. The protagonist immediately changed his strategy. He recalled his damage-dealing summons and switched to a control type, the rooted tiger, casting sleeping powder. The Kai quickly rolled onto its belly and fell into a deep sleep. But even so, his 400+ attack power was still not enough to pierce its shell. After repeatedly attacking its head, he barely managed to kill it after exerting a tremendous amount of effort. Because he couldn't effectively pierce its core, he was unable to retrieve the magic stone. It was a total loss. This made him start to reflect. A summoner's talent bonuses are primarily for intelligence and magic power. And his attack rating was only a C since the physical path was limited. Should he consider using magic? His intelligence was over 800. It couldn't just be for decoration. Coincidentally, Cecil had awakened her aptitude as a mage and frequently had a tutor come to give her lessons. As her personal attendant, the protagonist was also able to listen in. The teacher said that as long as the crystal ball shows a reaction, it would prove he had the talent for magic. Full of anticipation, the protagonist gave it a try. He waited until his face turned pale, but the crystal ball showed no reaction at all. In that moment, he finally understood that high stats didn't equal talent. He really had no aptitude for magic. At the same time, conflicts in the territory gradually began to surface. Because a white dragon had been dwelling on the barren side of the land for nearly a century, no one dared to explore it. Their economy was far behind that of the Viscount on the other side. The Viscount even mentioned the matter of the wild boar hunt in front of the king. This forced the territory to increase its tribute, offering up a large amount of wild boar meat. The manor's dining table, in contrast, looked meager. When the Viscount visited, he even deliberately flaunted the fact that his daughter had no talent. Meanwhile, the Lord was worried because his children did have talent, which left the protagonist completely baffled. It wasn't until he heard the phrase a noble's duty that he understood. Having talent meant you had to enter the center of power. Serfs cheer for talent, while nobles worry about it. Different positions naturally lead to different outcomes. Miha soon returned to the Academy City. Before his departure, Cecil was a crying mess. Watching this scene, the protagonist also started to miss his own family a little. But he knew that if he wanted to catch up to those geniuses growing rapidly in normal mode, he had to grit his teeth and endure hell mode. He never would have thought that the summoning system he had painstakingly cultivated for so many years. Name, attack power, 40, name, durability, 35, stamina, would actually start to take shape after a crisis. Strength, magic power plus 20 durability. Originally, he just relied on his summoned beasts to hunt monsters and level up little by little. But as his abilities continued to grow, he slowly realized the truly terrifying aspect of the summoner class. It wasn't just about simple combat power, but that once the system was fully established, he could achieve a leveling efficiency far beyond that of an ordinary person. Then one day, a sudden incident shattered the peace of the town. A man came running with a report. A B-rank magical beast, a Jufu, was approaching the town. Based on estimates, it would reach the city gates in another 2.5 minutes. You have to understand that in this world, once a magical beast reaches B rank, its power is on a completely different level from a C rank. You could say the gap is as wide as a watershed. What was even worse, the knights were out subjugating magical beasts at the time, leaving the town with almost no power to fight back. As soon as our hero got the news, he rushed to the city gates. Cecil, of course, was worried for his safety. But the situation was urgent. That butcher wasn't just any B-rank monster. It was also incredibly heavy, making it an extremely dangerous presence in the entire territory. When our hero arrived on the scene, the sight before him was even more horrifying. The monster was massive and incredibly strong. It was tossing a draft horse around like a toy. To make matters worse, a carriage hadn't managed to escape yet, and a mother and her daughter were sitting inside. Seeing how critical the situation was, our hero had to act. He started by throwing an iron ball right at the butcher's left eye. He successfully injured it and got its attention, then began to taunt it relentlessly. He drew all of its aggression towards himself, but deep down, he knew the truth. With his current strength, it was impossible to defeat a B-rank monster head-on. Therefore, there was only one good option, and that was to lure it away. So, our hero started dodging its attacks, while fleeing in a direction away from the town, planning to lead the butcher to White Dragon Mountain. Along the way, he barely dodged its punch and noticed the butcher actually had an excited look on its face. It was clearly treating this chase like some kind of game. And just then, our hero's magic power finally recovered. He immediately summoned a large number of beasts, converting all his buffs into speed and defense attributes, to ensure he could survive. Once the town was completely out of sight, he decided to test the B-rank monster's true strength. First up were his butterfly-type summoned beasts. They specialized in sleep-inducing skills. In the past, when used against C-rank beasts, this skill had a success rate of up to 80%. However, this time was completely different. 3 pairs of butterflies cast the sleep spell simultaneously, but it had no effect. At first, he thought it was just bad luck. So he summoned even more butterflies to try again, but the result was still the same. It was only then that he realized a B-rank monster's magic resistance was far beyond what he had anticipated. Since control skills were completely useless, he could only change his strategy and keep running. But unexpectedly, this butcher was exceptionally vengeful. It chased him from day to dusk, and from dusk into the dead of night. Just when he thought he had finally lost it, the creature caught up to him again as he was about to head back. And so, the chase continued for 3 whole days and nights, with our hero running frantically through the forest. He used the terrain to his advantage, not stopping until he was completely exhausted and had finally shaken his pursuer. By the time he dragged his exhausted body back to town, he had no strength left and collapsed on the spot. When he woke up again, it was the next day. Cecil and the butler had been watching over him the whole time. They were clearly very worried. Everyone was curious as to how he managed to escape from a B-rank monster. But since he couldn't reveal the existence of his summons, he could only attribute the key details to luck. Despite that, the Lord was still very satisfied. After all, it was because he lured the butcher away. that the town avoided an even greater disaster. So, the Lord rewarded him with 10 gold coins on the spot. The mother and daughter he had saved also gave him 10 gold coins as thanks. Just like that, our hero had earned 20 gold coins. With this money, he immediately went to upgrade his equipment, finally buying the mithril longsword he had always wanted. The effect of the new weapon was immediately apparent. Before, when he faced monsters with hard carapaces, he often couldn't break through their defense. But now, as long as he aimed for the gaps in their joints, his hunting efficiency increased instantly. He decided to conduct an experiment. First, he summoned 3 pairs of hate birds. One pair was sent to fly off and scout from a distance, while another pair was recalled into card form. He then put a piece of fruit into a bag and asked the hate bird that remained with him what was inside. It immediately answered that there was a piece of fruit inside. Next, he resummoned the hate bird that he had just recalled. That one also knew the answer. But when he called back the one that had flown far away, this individual, who hadn't appeared on the scene before, also knew the answer. To further prove it, he summoned a popo bird. But this summoned creature from a different species was completely clueless. Through this series of experiments, the protagonist finally reached an important conclusion. Summoned beasts of the same species can share information, but this sharing only happens between newly summoned individuals. In other words, as long as a summoned beast has gone through battle, its experience and memories will be inherited by the next of its kind. To put it another way, even if a summoned beast dies, its growth isn't truly lost, as long as the summoner is still alive. The experience they accumulate will be passed down continuously, eventually forming a constantly evolving army of summons. A month passed in a flash. The Lord's eldest son, Mihai, returned from the academy again. The two of them quickly had another sparring match. This year, the protagonist had already hunted over 2,000 C-rank magical beasts. His level had also risen to 28, but he still lost to Mihai. It was only then that he truly realized that the growth environment the city academy provided was far beyond what hunting in the wild could compare to. What's more, he had chosen hell difficulty, so his leveling speed was only 1% of a normal person's. Huge level gap already existed between them. But just then, news that shook the entire territory arrived. The White Dragon, which had been entrenched in the White Dragon mountain range for many years, suddenly moved. The White Dragon, which had been entrenched in the White Dragon mountain range for many years, suddenly moved. It flew to another region. With the White Dragon gone, the previously unminable mithril could finally be developed again. But before the official mining began, the Knight's Order must first clear out the monsters in the nearby area. This task would take at least a month. For the Lord, this was fantastic news, but the protagonist wasn't happy at all. Because once the Knight's Order started clearing monsters on a large scale, it was the same as them stealing his experience. Because of this, he started thinking about how to further improve his efficiency. Express, 2,516,810 out of 3 million. It just so happened that during this time, Express, 2,516,810 out of 30 million. His summoning skill reached level 5. His summoning skill reached level 5. Not only did his summon limit increase to 50, but he also unlocked an extremely crucial new ability. Share. After testing it, he discovered this skill allowed him to share vision and senses with his summoned beasts, with absolutely no distance limit. He could even remotely control his summoned beast's actions with his mind, just like controlling multiple characters at once. However, share also had its limits. At first, he could connect to a maximum of 5 summoned beasts. When he tried to share with a 6th one, a sharp pain immediately shot through his brain. After some research, he quickly found that the problem lay with his intelligence attribute. For every 200 points of intelligence, he could share with one more summoned beast. So, he immediately adjusted his stat allocation. He focused his attributes on intelligence. Once his intelligence increased to 1,200, he finally succeeded in unlocking a 6th shared perspective. Next, he summoned a batch of Earth-rank summoned beasts. These summoned beasts not only had high intelligence, but they also each had different abilities. Attack power 40, durability 35, strength 120. The bears and spiders were in charge of offense and defense. Attack power 140. Bonus. Magic plus 20, luck plus 20. Durability 200. The fish-type summoned beast can increase the entire party's evasion rate. The owl was in charge of night vision and reconnaissance, while the potato-type summoned beast could quickly grow magic fruits to instantly restore his magic power. As these abilities were combined, a brand new combat system gradually took shape. During the day, the hawk birds would conduct long-range reconnaissance. At night, the owls would take over the patrol, while the front lines had offense, defense, and support working in concert. The protagonist quickly realized that if he divided these summoned beasts into small teams, he could even hunt in different areas simultaneously. In other words, as long as he put his summoned beasts in the wild on autopilot, they could automatically battle and level up, and all he had to do was monitor the situation at any time through their shared vision. And while he was testing this ability, he suddenly remembered something. Since share has no distance limit, does that mean he could also use his summoned beasts to go back and take a look at his hometown? So, for the first time, he saw his familiar village from afar through a shared perspective. His childhood friend was chatting with the blacksmith's son. His father was still working in the fields, while his mother was inside the house, tying his little sister's hair. The protagonist didn't go over to disturb them, just quietly placed a gold coin on the windowsill before leaving. It's gold? That's great. Everyone is doing well. From now on, I'll be checking in every month with a plot breakdown of Hard Mode Summoner. The man never would have imagined that the class he received was the 8-star hidden class, Summoner. In theory, it should have been the strongest, but in reality, that wasn't the case at all. Forget fighting higher level monsters, he couldn't even defeat a simple pair of B-rank monsters with all his might. The problem wasn't that the class was weak, but that he had chosen hard mode at the very beginning. In this difficulty, killing monsters only gave him 1% of the normal experience, while others could level up just by casually farming a few mobs. Meanwhile, he'd fight his heart out for ages, and his level would barely budge, leaving him severely behind. Stamina plus 20, attack power plus 20. This made the supposedly terrifying class seem rather pathetic. Stamina plus 20. However, the protagonist soon realized, since gaining experience was so inefficient, he would have to make up for it with sheer numbers. Using the summoner's ability to control his summons from a distance, he came up with a ridiculously clever way to level up. AFK grinding. He left large numbers of his summons out in the wild for long periods to kill stray monsters. While he was still at his day job as a servant in the Lord's mansion, experience points would automatically come in every now and then. His summons hunted day and night without rest, and whenever a monster died, the experience would be transferred back to him through a sharing ability. It was like having an army grinding levels for him automatically, 24 hours a day without rest. However, the good days didn't last. Because the Lord was preparing to reopen the mithril mine in the mountains, but the area around the cave had long been overrun by monsters. So, the Order of Knights would soon begin a large-scale extermination. If he waited for them to act, all those walking experience points would be gone. To grind as much experience as possible before the knights arrived, the protagonist decided to strike first, targeting the monster settlements directly. Wiping out a single settlement was equivalent to harvesting tens, or even hundreds, of monsters all at once. His first target was a goblin settlement. As his level had slowly increased, these D-rank monsters were no longer a threat. The protagonist first had his summons seal off all the exits. Then, he sent in his summoned army of bears and spiders to steamroll them. While there were quite a few goblins, they stood no chance against the endless wave of summons. Even the Goblin King was soon ganged up on and killed by the bear summons. In that single short battle, he eliminated over 200 goblins and gained nearly 50,000 experience points. Over the next month, he cleared out nearly every goblin settlement in the vicinity. His level finally climbed from 30 to 35, just as our protagonist was busy power leveling. The Lord's eldest son, Mihai, returned home from the academy. Ordinarily, this would be something to celebrate, but his expression was unusually grave. Not long after arriving, Mihai asked the protagonist for a rematch. The two of them sparred once a year, but this time was clearly different. This time, the protagonist went all out too, using various summon cards to buff his own stats. His speed and power had improved drastically compared to last year, and he thought he might finally win for once. But soon after the fight started, he sensed something was off. It was as if Mihai could predict his every move. All of his attacks, fast or slow, were effortlessly parried, even though his own speed stat was higher. Their power levels were about the same, but the difference in their sword skills was just too great to overcome. In the end, the protagonist's sword was sent flying once again, and he lost the match. However, Mihai wore a rare smile, saying that at least this year, the protagonist was strong enough to make him get serious. But after the duel, Mihai suddenly announced that he was leaving to fulfill his so-called duty as a noble. No one explained what this duty actually was, only that he would be leaving home the very next day. He likely wouldn't be able to return for 3 years, and the Lord and his wife looked incredibly somber. Before he left, Mihai even gave the protagonist a hug, whispering and asking him to please protect his younger sister. In that moment, the protagonist could clearly feel Mihai's hands trembling slightly. It was as if he had already foreseen what was to come. Half a year flew by. The goblins were nearly all wiped out, so the protagonist shifted his target to the more dangerous orc settlements. The orcs were all C-rank monsters, far stronger than the goblins. Moreover, there were hundreds of them. The battle started off smoothly enough. The bear-type summons could suppress ordinary orcs one-on-one, while the spiders handled crowd control on the archers. But as they ventured deeper, the situation suddenly changed. A fireball suddenly fell from the sky. It turned out the settlement was hiding orc mages who could use magic. The magic attack instantly caused the summoned beasts heavy losses. The protagonist could only seize the opportunity to use a throwing skill to instantly kill one of the mages. But the remaining mage quickly took cover and continued casting spells. At the same time, the real trouble appeared, the Orc King. This B-rank monster was incredibly powerful. The bear-type summons were instantly killed with a single touch. Although the protagonist could keep summoning new units, his killing speed was nowhere near fast enough to keep up with them. Brawn, Prot. What do? I can't muster the strength to fight the boss. It's a stalemate. All I can do now is retreat. Just as the situation was about to spiral out of control, the captain of the Knight's Order suddenly arrived. The captain didn't say a word and directly drew his sword to face the Orc King. At that moment, the protagonist truly witnessed what top-tier power looked like. Facing the B-rank monster, the captain didn't dodge at all. Instead, he met it head-on. After one clash, he leapt into the air. As a sharp ray of sword light came down, the powerful Orc King was instantly split in two. Meanwhile, the vice-captain was also on a rampage, killing a large number of orcs and mages in one go. After the battle, the protagonist thought his secret was exposed, but to his surprise, the captain told him. He said he'd actually figured it out long ago. Ever since the protagonist became the Lord's son-in-law, monster carcasses with their magic stones extracted started appearing frequently outside the city. On top of that, he was able to hold his own in a fight against Mihai. It would have been strange not to be suspicious of him. The only thing that surprised the captain was that the protagonist's ability was to be a summoner. Even so, the captain didn't expose him. Instead, he kept his secret. He only asked that he regularly report his progress in subjugating monsters in the future. With the experience from the last time, the protagonist challenged the orc settlement again 2 weeks later. This time, he changed his tactics, having the bear-type summons surround them from 4 directions simultaneously. He prioritized killing the orc mages, completely disrupting their formation. After losing their magic support, the orc king could no longer hold back the massive legion of summons. In the end, under the relentless pressure of the summon wave tactic, the entire settlement was completely annihilated. And the protagonist gained over 300,000 experience points in one go. However, the good times didn't last. That same autumn, a royal emissary suddenly arrived in the territory, bringing terrible news. Mihai was dead. The so-called noble's duty was actually to send talented young nobles to the front lines after they turned 15 to fight against the Demon King's forces who command monsters. It was an extremely brutal war where it was said that more than half of the participants would die. Only then did the Lord's family completely break down, and the protagonist finally understood why Mihai had made that expression back then. What no one expected was that after learning the truth, the young lady argued fiercely with her father. She couldn't accept that this noble's duty meant constantly sending family members to die on the battlefield. That night, she secretly snuck out of her room through the window and ran away from home. By the time anyone noticed, the entire territory was in an uproar, and as the person entrusted to look after her, the protagonist had no choice but to set out on a journey to find her. He never would have imagined that he would one day be grinding monsters to the point of questioning his existence. This time, the target he had his sights on was an ant nest of ridiculous proportions. Even though they were only C-rank monsters, their numbers were in the thousands. What was more troublesome was a B-rank ant queen deep inside the nest that could continuously lay eggs. For any ordinary person, this place was basically a forbidden zone. But for him, a summoner, it was the complete opposite. In a battle of numbers against those of the same rank, he was practically unrivaled. He alone was equal to an entire army. A nest that others would need a party to conquer was one he could slowly grind down through sheer numbers and attrition. At first, the push forward went quite smoothly. The soldier ants on the outskirts stood no chance against his summoned beasts. But he quickly realized something was off. The Kai's respawn rate was absurdly fast. He could clear out 200 of them in a single day. After a month, he had taken down at least 2,000, but the number in the nest hadn't decreased at all. He hadn't even figured out the internal structure yet. This was no longer normal monster grinding. It was like being thrown into a dungeon with infinite respawns. What's more, the bodies of those he killed would all disappear by the next day. He quickly realized these bodies were most likely being reused by the queen. They were turned into new soldiers. In other words, however many he killed, the enemy could replenish. But the problem was, he wasn't afraid of a war of attrition either. If they could spawn infinitely, he would just grind infinitely. Just like that, he stubbornly held out at the nest's entrance for a full 2 months, killing a total of over 5,000 Kai. Until one day, new soldiers finally stopped emerging from the nest entrance. At that moment, he knew his chance had come. The queen's production could no longer keep up with his culling rate. He had finally won this tug of war. However, he didn't rush in recklessly. Instead, he first sent out summoned beasts with night vision to scout the way. At the same time, he activated vision sharing, mapping out the nest little by little. The result was as expected. The internal structure was as complex as a maze. But for him, that wasn't a big problem. The summoned beasts were expendable. If one died, he'd summon another, slowly scouting out the route. It took an entire day. He finally locked onto the queen's location. It was a monster of enormous size. Its appearance was almost like a giant's, and there weren't many guards left around it. That's because its forces had been mostly wiped out by the protagonist over these 2 months. The real battle was over surprisingly quickly. The Kai Queen's greatest threat had never been her fighting ability, but her egg-laying ability. Once she lost her numerical advantage, her main body seemed fragile in comparison. Under the siege of the summoned beasts, her defenses were quickly torn apart. In the end, it only cost him about 20 summoned beasts. This 2-month-long war of attrition was finally over. In comparison, dealing with the Ogre King back then had cost him 200 summoned beasts. The difference was already obvious. He needed to prepare some proof that he had subjugated the monster. So, the next day, he brought the Kai Queen's body back directly. He thought it would shock everyone, but instead, he was met with doubt. After all, as far as anyone knew, a nest like this was impossible for a single person to clear. Not to mention, no one had ever even seen the queen before. But he didn't bother to explain much. He simply took out the mithril ore he found near the nest and submitted the complete map of the nest. Only then did the Baron and the Knight Commander have no choice but to accept reality. An 11-year-old boy had not only solo cleared a nest but had also discovered a new mine in the process. According to the rules, he would receive 30% of the mining rights. This was no longer just about getting rich, he had achieved complete financial freedom. But to him, none of that was very important. What he really wanted was to leave this place and go on an adventure. It was also during this time that Cecil's transformation left a deep impression on him. The boy who once fled from his destiny because of his brother's death, after experiencing all this, finally understood that life is full of choices. And this time, he chose to bear the family's responsibility, just like his brother. Everything was originally heading in a stable direction, until a royal messenger arrived at their door once more. He also brought the neighboring Viscount. The Viscount proposed a so-called joint management of the mine. He said it nicely, but in reality, he just wanted a piece of the profits. The Baron refused on the spot, deciding to head to the royal capital himself to confirm the matter. The two parties parted on bad terms, but it was from this moment on that the situation completely changed. On the night of the second day after the messenger left, the mansion was suddenly attacked. The enemy's objective was very clear. It was to take Cecil. The protagonist acted immediately, but he quickly discovered these people were no joke. They were clearly well-trained combat personnel, and they had no intention of holding back at all. Just as he was preparing to get serious, the enemy threw a smoke bomb, and caught off guard, he was knocked unconscious. When he woke up, he was already tied up, with Cecil right beside him. Fortunately, he didn't panic. As long as he could see, he could still use his summoning ability. He secretly sent out a small summoned beast to scout the area. It quickly discovered their location was off. Outside the window wasn't the ground, but the open sky. They had been taken onto a magical airship, their escape route completely cut off. More importantly, while investigating further, he heard a familiar voice. Viscount and that so-called royal envoy. It was only then that he fully understood. This wasn't a royal command at all, but a thorough conspiracy from the very beginning. Their goal was singular, to capture him, and the bargaining chip they held was Cecil, the hostage. Realizing this, he didn't hesitate any longer. Insect de FGH Island DEFG Grass Def Stone does. Since no one is coming to save us, I'll have to rely on myself. Insect E5 Silence E5 Grass E40 Insect de FGH Silence DEFGH Island DEFG Grass de Stone de Fish D. What he had to do next was simple. Insect E5 Silence E5 Bird Grass E40. First, figure out how to escape, then wreak havoc on the entire ship. Durability plus 5 agility 3 plus 5 durability plus 2 stamina plus 2 sub durability plus 2 magic plus 2 strength plus 2 durability plus 5 agility 3 plus 5 sub durability plus 2 agility plus 2 stamina plus 2 politics plus 2 grass plus 2 strength plus 2 agility plus 2 intellect plus 2 stamina plus 2 durability plus 2 magic plus 2 strength plus 2. Put them to sleep. XX. He's gone? The counterattack begins. The man never would have thought. That is an 8-star summoner, who should be at the pinnacle of his profession. He couldn't even take a single hit from a 1-star opponent. In this line of work, every star level is a massive gap. But for him, it was the complete opposite. There was only one reason: he had chosen hell difficulty from the start. His express gain was only 1% of the norm, severely suppressing his level. It was like a level 10 fighting a level 100. Essentially, he had to risk his life in every fight. And it was under these dire circumstances that he got dragged into the kidnapping of a wealthy young lady. At first, he thought they were just common thugs. By combining his summoned beast's attribute bonuses with his skills, it wasn't impossible to overcome challenges far above his level. But after they actually fought, he realized it wasn't like that at all. His opponent was just a 1-star practitioner, but their speed and explosive power were absurd. They closed the distance in an instant, sending him flying with a single kick. This was his first real fight against another practitioner, and the gap between them felt infinitely vast. He could only tank the hits using his summoned healer while quickly laying out his skills. First, he had a bird-type beast create a sound distraction in a blind spot, then used the spider-type beast to restrict movement with its silk. Finally, he summoned a shield bearer to block the path and buy time. The moment the white-haired pursuer was distracted, he broke through the encirclement with the young lady, but his opponent reacted instantly and was hot on their trail. By then, the magical airship had already started its descent. If they didn't get out now, they'd be completely trapped. With no way out, he made the most extreme choice. He allocated all his stat points to endurance. Holding the young lady, he leapt from the sky. He took the full impact of the 100-meter fall, and his bones shattered instantly. But thanks to a healing herb, he recovered in an instant. The sheer shock of it all left the young lady speechless. But escaping was just the beginning of their nightmare. As soon as they landed, the protagonist sent out a flying beast for aerial reconnaissance. At the same time, he began taking deliberately confusing routes. He soon confirmed that his pursuer had a way to track them. So he constantly erased his tracks, crossed rooftops, and created false trails, slowing the pace of the chase as much as possible. But his opponent wasn't stupid either and used a wide area search to lock onto their general direction. They were closing in so fast it was almost a straight line. He had no choice but to keep reallocating his stats, pulling back and forth between speed and stealth. The escape lasted for 4 whole days. During that time, the young lady was no longer a burden. At critical moments, she would even push herself to cast fireballs to provide cover. But the difference in their power was too great, she could only buy them a few moments at best. The protagonist knew that if he let them get in close for a major attack again, he wouldn't get a second chance. Just as he was about to return to his territory, he ran into a truly deadly situation. The B-rank monster whose eyes he had blinded years ago appeared again. It clearly held a grudge for a long time, and its power was now close to the peak of B-rank. He originally thought he could now easily handle B-rank monsters, but he discovered that the gap between those of the same rank was also huge. His summon couldn't even block a single blow. Bell, use shatter. Spider, use spider web. Brawn, use bodyguard. In a moment of carelessness, he was caught directly. The creature planned to eat him alive, but this very choice gave him a chance to counterattack. He had long since focused his attribute points on endurance to withstand the bites. The moment it opened its mouth, he switched to an attack power boost and precisely stabbed its only weak point, its eye. A critical hit on a weak point plus burst damage took it out in one go. Not only did he get his revenge, but he also gained far more experience than a normal B-rank monster would give. But the price was a severe delay, and that was enough time for Whitehair to catch up again. This time, he was completely exhausted. He couldn't even stand steady, let alone fight. Whitehair was no longer in a hurry to kill him, but instead showed obvious sadistic pleasure. He prepared to torture him slowly. At the critical moment, Qian-jin endured her fear and tried to fight back. But she was still overpowered. The protagonist, however, started to deliberately provoke him. He taunted Whitehair, calling him a coward who only lasted a year in the arena before running away. He said he only knew how to bully the weak. Whitehair was completely enraged, and his attacks became even more ferocious. But the protagonist smiled, because stalling for time was exactly what he wanted. The next second, the Earth Guild Master descended from the sky, dominating the scene with a single blow. Only then did Whitehair realize the gravity of the situation, but it was already too late. They were both survivors of the arena, but Whitehair only lasted a year, while the Guild Master survived for a full 10 years. This was a gap that couldn't be measured simply by levels. Whitehair's full power attack couldn't even break his defense, while the Guild Master killed him instantly with a single counterattack. The battle ended on the spot. Afterwards, everyone returned to the territory. The protagonist revealed the whole truth. The mastermind of the incident was not only the lord of the neighboring territory, but it also involved a royal envoy. But the problem was the lack of evidence. It would be difficult to get to the real mastermind through normal means, so he made a proposal. He would hand over 30% of his mithril mining rights to the royal family in exchange for a chance at a thorough investigation. To put it plainly, it was trading benefits for justice. When clean rules don't work, you use the rules of a higher power to fight back. The lord was heartbroken over the loss, of course. But he also understood this was the most effective way. At the same time, he offered 600 gold coins as compensation. He officially began to treat the protagonist as a guest of honor. In the end, the mastermind was dealt with, and the lord used the opportunity to get a promotion. The situation stabilized, and after this series of events, the protagonist finally came into contact with the core truth of this world. In this world, there exists a demon king in the truest sense. The demon king is a 5-star class, with the ability to command millions of B-rank monsters. And it can strengthen all monsters under its command. 50 years ago, the demon king initiated the Great Flame Calamity. In just 2.5 years, it destroyed 4 nations. Humans, elves, and dwarves were forced to form an alliance. To fight the demon king, each country established a one-nation, one-academy system. Any child who tested to have talent must enter the academy at the age of 12 for 3 years of training. After graduating at 15, they are sent directly to the battlefield. This is the so-called noble's duty, and the cruelty of the battlefield is far beyond imagination. Even with the existence of a hero, the survival rate is still less than 50%. The 22-year-old hero is the only one who can currently face the demon king head-on and is still fighting on the front lines. But even so, the human faction is still at a disadvantage. The war could be lost at any moment. It was only after understanding all this that the protagonist finally realized the significance of being an entry-level summoner. This so-called hard mode wasn't to make him suffer more, but to forcibly suppress his growth speed. It forces him to polish every step to perfection. Otherwise, once his growth is unleashed, he would have long become an overpowered being who just steamrolls everything. After the matter came to a close, the Lord made a new request. He hoped the protagonist would act as a bodyguard, accompanying his daughter to the academy to protect her on the future battlefield. Because his daughter possesses an extremely rare talent, not even her noble status can exempt her from military service. And it was then that the protagonist's status also changed, due to his merits and contributions in this incident. And with the Lord's approval, he was formally made a viscount. A man from the lowest rungs of society, born a slave, had in one leap become a noble with independent status. Faced with this trust, he did not refuse, agreeing to become the young lady's bodyguard. But he also stated his own conditions. First, to use 400 gold coins to buy back the freedom of his family and companions, completely erasing their slave status. Second, to renounce his former identity, and step into the next chapter of his life as an independent man. The Lord agreed to all of it. He handed him the dagger that symbolized his noble status, formally recognizing him as an important ally of the family. It was only at this moment that the protagonist truly understood why he had been reincarnated. If he hadn't climbed his way up from the very bottom, step by step, if he hadn't experienced slavery and oppression, he never could have made it to this day, much less be qualified to face the Demon King. This so-called hard mode was never a punishment but a test. And the story's final destination had long been made clear. Defeating the Demon King is just the outcome. Before that, he must continue to grow stronger. He will enter the academy, step onto the field, and live in the same era as the hero.